Youths from the Sandinista movement allegedly set fire to the opposition party's headquarters during the night. The Sandinista army eventually turned up to inspect the damage. They described the burning as the will of the people. Despite the fire, though, there is still an opposition here, an almost free press, and in the 18 months since the revolution, no widespread killing, a rarity in Central America. The initials of the Sandinista Liberation Front that spearheaded Nicaragua's own revolution are picked out in concrete on a volcanic hillside that dominates the town of Managua. That the Sandinistas succeeded was in part due to the help given them by the leftists in El Salvador, who at a critical moment gave the Sandinistas large amounts of money to buy weapons. Each evening and at weekends, about 100,000 Nicaraguans across the country turn out voluntarily for militia training designed to defend their revolution from outside attack. As they do so, they shout slogans of solidarity with their colleagues 300 miles to the north in El Salvador. Militia training has taken off since the United States decided to suspend aid here in the belief that these people were now supplying Salvador's guerrillas. All over Nicaragua there are painted slogans saying, "If Nicaragua could win, then so can El Salvador." The American embassy here now believes that practical aid by Nicaragua to the Salvadorian guerrillas has stopped, despite the continuing emotional commitment. They say that satellite pictures revealed the Nicaraguans extending airstrips and loading warehouses with arms for shipment, but that since America complained, it has all ceased. But the human realities of Nicaragua's link with the crisis in El Salvador remain. There are now 10,000 Salvadorian refugees here, most of whom have come by sea. Though they're reasonably housed, their presence highlights a serious economic problem. For although Nicaragua is 7 times the size of El Salvador, it only has half the population. Agriculture here has always been totally dependent upon migrant labor for harvesting. All these people picking peanuts are in fact Salvadorian refugees, but because of the civil war in their country, hardly any of the 250,000 regular migrant workers have come here to harvest. Cotton has suffered worst, with whole fields uncollected. This band of Nicaraguans humping sackloads here even had a visit from the 3 members of the ruling junta last week. They put in an afternoon's cotton picking, as do other volunteers across the country. On the coast, nearest El Salvador, we found no more evidence that fishermen were shipping weapons to the guerrillas, but at least the indication that if they had been, they weren't any longer. Although the Americans may have succeeded for the moment in pressuring the Nicaraguans not to continue supplying the left in El Salvador, they have done nothing to break the emotional commitment that these people feel towards their friends across the water. As a result, America's battle to try to prevent the guerrillas winning there may yet prove a very long one. Jon Snow, News at 10, Corinto, in Nicaragua. There are many here who would like to see the conservatives abandoned. The Europeans and Americans who underwrote the revolution with cash want to keep a coalition of both right and left in power. The signs are that Cuba and the Eastern Bloc would prefer something more radical. Like these Sandinistas, supporters of the conservative faction also hoped to stage a rally the next day, 40 miles south of Managua. The meeting had been sanctioned by the junta. First thing in the morning, roadblocks had been set up on the road from Managua to Nandaime, the meeting spot. Intimidation not to attend the pro-conservative rally had been rife. Supporters of the Sandinistas chanted more slogans in the road, but people could pass and there was no violence. Further on, a smouldering lorry had been moved from blocking the road. The opposition conservatives had been trying to hold a rally since October. Today, they looked no more likely to succeed. In Nandaime, the burnt-out shell of the opposition party's headquarters underlined that there was to be no rally. Youths from the Sandinista movement allegedly set fire to the place during the night. Worried supporters of the opposition group looked on. The Sandinistas fear that these people are drawing more support than they would normally get because the revolution here has so far failed to live up to people's expectations. The Sandinista army eventually turned up to inspect the damage, but it provided no protection against the threatened action during the night. They described the burning as the will of the people. Despite the fire, though, there is still an opposition here, an almost free press, and little atmosphere of fear. And in the 18 months since the revolution, no widespread killing, a rarity in Central America. As the army cleared the people from the grounds, the incident had served to highlight the knife-edge balance on which Nicaragua's revolution is currently poised. It is Nicaragua's involvement with the revolution in El Salvador, at least as much as this country's own internal political problems, that is determining whether America decides to cut off aid here or not. If they cut the aid, then the chances of Nicaragua developing into a totalitarian society closed to the West will be greatly increased. Jon Snow, News at 10, Nandaime in Nicaragua. Cuba's National Dance Theatre opens to an enthusiastic response from a Nicaraguan audience in the heart of Managua, an unthinkable event anywhere in Central America until 18 months ago. But today, beside the visiting dancers, there are some 3,000 Cuban doctors, teachers and soldiers working in Nicaragua. Outside the theatre, a stark reminder of just one of the factors that made Nicaragua's revolution and the Cubans' presence here possible. Devastated buildings smashed in the earthquake which killed 10,000 people here 9 years ago. The money raised by the outside world to rebuild Managua was embezzled by Nicaragua's then leader, General Somoza. It was the corruption and wholesale abuse of human rights under his regime that led the country's middle classes to join forces with the Sandinista guerrillas 20 months ago to overthrow Somoza. A collection of his old tanks and armored cars still bear witness to his defeat and to the moment America found herself for the first time pouring money into a socialist revolution in Central America. It is here that Nicaragua's revolution differs from that in El Salvador, for there neither the middle classes nor the Americans have been prepared to join the more leftward-leaning guerrillas. 50 miles outside Managua, a Cuban lecturer briefs Nicaraguan volunteer teachers on the next phase of the country's highly successful literacy campaign. He is one of 2,000 Cuban teachers involved in trying to educate the 50% of the population who, at Somoza's downfall, could neither read nor write. Every day, towards dusk, teachers move out to the remote villages in one of the most highly organized literacy drives on record. Little groups of volunteer villagers sit and recite the occasionally politically charged exercises until they can read simple sentences. Another young Cuban volunteer looks on to monitor their progress. But in the main, the literacy drive, though considerably aided by Cuba, is being run by the Nicaraguans themselves on a remarkable self-help basis. This teacher is a 14-year-old who is herself still at school. One of the women she is teaching is her 57-year-old aunt. At his headquarters in Managua, Father Fernando Cardinal, the Nicaraguan priest who leads the literacy drive, told us that the Cubans were the best people to assist with it. They had conducted a similar campaign themselves, spoke Spanish, and understood the culture. He himself has been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for his work here by 130 British MPs. A mile from his office, another Cuban, this time a doctor, examines Nicaraguan children in part of another revolutionary scheme to attack the causes of child mortality here. 1 in 10 of all Nicaraguan babies dies before the age of 1. The most common killer, dehydration in the aftermath of diarrhea. These babies are being fed a saline glucose mixture supplied by UNESCO. Their mothers are being educated in how and when to make use of it. Nearby, a Cuban health education specialist briefs Nicaraguans who will travel out into the regions to inform more families about how to save their children. Cuba's aid to Nicaragua is masterminded here at a new embassy compound on the outskirts of Managua. What worries the West is that the aid is not restricted to health and literacy. For in addition, the Cubans are training and building up Nicaragua's army to be the biggest in Central America. When Fidel Castro himself came here in July, he used the still lively local volcano to emphasize his philosophy. Central America, he said, is a series of volcanoes waiting to explode. Well, America is trying to keep the lid on El Salvador's volcano, but Nicaragua's has already blown once. The political tensions derived from both East and West pouring aid and advice into this strategic but underdeveloped country threaten another explosion. Jon Snow, News at 10, Masaya Volcano, Nicaragua.